Hi everyone. In the shadows, James's father is secretly planning to take little Nye away. Will this fragile little family survive when bloodline and love collide? Today, we dive into the episode where Deep becomes the official owner of the new DJ Collection Point and James is only her assistant on paper. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. Morning light touched the small house at the foot of the mountain. James stepped into the yard with one arm around Diep's waist, helping her walk. Slowly. One more step, he said. Diep's bare feet pressed into the packed earth. Her legs shook, but she took 3 small steps on her own before holding his arm again. That's good, James smiled. You're getting stronger every day. The door opened. Nye came out with her school backpack and 2 crooked pigtails. But James, Deep, look! My hair is pretty, right? She spun. Very pretty, Deep said. Your bar tried. Nye hugged his neck. But today pick me up early. Promise. I promise, he said. Deep watched them, a warm, quiet feeling rising in her chest. For a moment, this little yard felt like a real home. When Nye disappeared down the dirt path to school, Deep turned to James. Today, can you take me to the DJ office? She asked. I want to see it. He hesitated. The road is long. If you feel tired, we come back. I don't want to hide here forever, she said softly, and I want to see where we're starting again. The word we made him look at her a little longer. Then he nodded. Okay, we go slow. Deal? Deal, she replied. The old motorbike coughed to life. James wrapped a scarf around her neck. It's not cold, she muttered. It makes me feel better, he answered. She climbed on behind him, arms circling his waist. They rolled down the mountain road past fields and scattered houses. At a narrow bend above a steep drop, Deep's fingers dug into his jacket. This is where, she whispered. James slowed. They both remembered the accident, the fall, the nights at the hospital. This time we just pass by, he said quietly. Then we leave it behind. Deep took a breath. Okay, let's pass it. The road widened. After a while, the roofs of the small town appeared, but instead of heading into the busy centre, James turned onto a quieter 3-way junction on the edge of town. There, at the corner where 3 dusty roads met, stood the new DJ office. The junction looked a little empty at first glance, no shops, no noise. But every so often, a tractor rattled by with sacks of corn. A motorbike dragged a cart of cassava or sweet potatoes. A farmer pedalled past with baskets of fruit tied to the back. This road is always quiet like this, Diep asked softly as they stopped. Quiet, but it's the route farmers use when they bring crops out, James said. It's not crowded, trucks can stop easily and people don't get pushed around like in the middle of town. He parked and helped her down carefully. Above the wide doorway, a simple board hung with freshly painted letters, DJ Agricultural Collection Point. In smaller letters underneath, Owner Nguyen Diep. In one corner of the sign, in even smaller print, was another line, Assistant James. Deep stared at it, stunned. Owner, that's me. James scratched his neck. The company license is in your name. I'm just your assistant. Why? She blurted. You're the one who's staying, he said gently. This is your home. I just came back from the city. It's right that DJ belongs to you. I'll help you run it. Her throat tightened, emotion and fear mixing together. She didn't know what to say, so she just looked at the sign a little longer. Inside, the roller door was half open. The smell of new wood and plaster filled the small room. The place had only recently been set up, and it still looked like a work in progress. One wall already held a long counter where sacks could be opened, checked and weighed. A big space near the entrance was marked with chalk for the heavy scale they would install later. 2 workers were sanding wooden shelves. Another measured a frame for what would become a price board. Chi Diep Shuang Roy, one worker called. Bachutoi Kiem Trakia, Lam Kandanan Hemoi, another joked. Diep's cheeks flushed. Don't call me that, she said automatically. James grinned. You heard them. Boss. He guided her around slowly. This office is for buying everything farmers bring, James explained. Corn, cassava, sweet potatoes, fruit, vegetables, whatever they grow. He pointed to the shelves. We sort by type so the loading truck won't be a mess. Here for corn, there for cassava, that side for fresh fruit and vegetables. Near the doorway, a wide area had been cleared. Trucks can pull right up here, James continued. Farmers don't have to carry heavy sacks too far. We weigh openly, pay them right away. No middleman, no hidden fees. Deep ran her fingers along the unfinished counter, feeling the grain of the wood. All this, just so people can sell easier. Just so people can live a little easier, he corrected quietly. She looked around again. The quiet junction outside, the empty fields beyond, the simple office slowly taking shape. It wasn't fancy, but it felt solid, honest. And where do I sit, she asked, trying to turn her racing heart into a joke. James pointed to the chair behind the counter. Right there, Madam Owner. You record deliveries, talk to farmers, check the price board. I carry sacks and make tea, she laughed softly. You, an assistant? I'm serious, he said. Paperwork, license, everything is under your name. DJ is yours. The words landed deep, heavier than she expected. Part of her wanted to run away from the responsibility. Another part, the part that had been stepped on, doubted and rejected for years, quietly stood up inside her. Then I want one more thing, she said. What thing? A corner for the kids, she replied, pointing to a small space near the door. Some stools, old picture books, maybe crayons. Children always follow their parents when they bring corn and fruit. Let them sit, draw, wait. Then farmers can talk business without worrying their kids are running under the trucks. James looked at the corner, imagining it. A kid's corner in a buying office. He smiled. That sounds like a very deep idea. Your first order as owner then? Yes, she said, shoulders a little straighter. My first order, he nodded. I'll find stools and books. You design it. They stood side by side at the doorway for a moment, watching a motorbike pass by with 2 big sacks of cassava tied to the back. The rider glanced at the signboard, slowed down, then drove on. Soon, James said softly, they'll stop here and they'll know it's your place. Dieppe didn't answer, but as the mountain wind blew through the unfinished room, her hand slowly curled around the edge of the counter, almost as if she were already holding on to her own future. The workers finished sanding the last shelf, dust hanging in the afternoon light. James glanced at his watch. We should go before Nee gets home, he said. If she doesn't see us, she'll climb the whole mountain to find us. That sounds like her, Dieppe smiled. They stepped outside just as a motorbike pulling a cart of dried corn rattled past the quiet 3-way junction. The old farmer slowed to read the new sign. DJ Agricultural Collection Point, he read. You buying yet, son? Not today, Uncle. We're still fixing things, James replied. When we open, the buying price will be written big on that board. The old man nodded. If you buy straight and pay fair, people will come. His gaze shifted to Dieppe, noticing James standing close. You the owner? He asked. Dieppe hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Uncle. My name is Dieppe. When you come, just call me. Good. A woman keeps the books. The place will be tidy. He drove off, leaving a thin line of dust. Dieppe watched him go. The first person to call me owner, she murmured. And the first time I heard you admit it, James said. We're off to a good start. The ride back up the mountain felt different. The same dangerous curve, the same trees, but now there was a sign in town with her name on it. By the time they reached the little house, the light had turned soft and gold. Nye's shoes lay kicked off by the door. Me Dieppe, he shouted, rushing out. You went somewhere without me? I had to check something important, Dieppe said, opening her arms. Next time take me. I can carry light stuff. James grinned. Light stuff like what? Like snacks, she answered. People sell corn, they get hungry. I sell snacks, we'll be rich. Dieppe laughed. Looks like DJ just hired a sales manager. When the heat faded, they went to the patch of land behind the house. A few tired vegetable rows struggled between rocks and weeds. We start here, Dieppe said. We dig, we plant. Later, Nye eats more vegetables, less noodles. Deal? Nye groaned. Can't we plant instant noodles instead? If that worked, James said, lifting the hoe, everyone would be farming noodles. He turned the soil while Dieppe sat on a low stool, pulling grass and picking out stones. Nye leapt from furrow to furrow. A clump of earth hit James's shirt. Bah! The soil attacked you, Nye yelled. James stabbed the hoe into the ground. Then we attacked back. Deep watched him, sweat at his temples, hands firm on the handle. This wasn't a man visiting the countryside for a few days. This was someone who had decided to stay. James, she said quietly. He glanced up. Thank you, she said. For what? For choosing this. Me, Nye. This mountain. Instead of running back to your old life. He looked at the dug-up earth, at their crooked house, at Nye stomping in mud, then back at her. I didn't choose less, he said. I just chose different. Their eyes met for a brief moment, until Nye proudly held up an earthworm. Look, a moving noodle! Put it back, Dieppe laughed. That one works for us. By evening, a small bed of fresh earth lay neat and ready. They washed, then shared a simple dinner of rice, greens and eggs. Halfway through, the light flickered and went out. Again, James muttered. It's okay, Dieppe said. Candles make food feel special. They lit a small oil lamp. Yellow light pooled on the worn table. Outside, the mountain hummed with insects. James opened Nye's old storybook and sat near the lamp. Tonight our big boss will listen too, he joked. I'm just staff, Deep protested. In DJ, you're the owner, he said. Here. He paused. Here, your family. The word landed between them. Nye curled up with her head on Deep's thigh. James read, voice low. Slowly, Deep's shoulder leaned against his. He didn't move. Far below, in town, another lamp burned. James's father sat at the table. The DNA report folded beside his teacup. His wife dried dishes. You're still thinking about that paper, she said. How can I not? It says that girl has nothing to do with our blood. She still calls him Bar, his wife replied. She still clings to Deep like a chick to a hen. He stared at the wall. And what if one day her real parents appear, take her away? James breaks. That woman breaks. We stand there helpless, he sighed. If we step in now, at least we can shape her future. Good school, safe house, our family name. By pulling her away from the only home she knows, his wife asked. I'm not pulling, he insisted. I'm moving her somewhere safer. Up there, one storm, one illness, one stranger at the door, and everything falls apart. Down here, we can protect her. You're thinking of protection, she said, but also of control. He didn't answer. After a moment he said, we start with school. Tell James and Deep we'll pay if she studies in town. Say it's for her education. If they love her, they'll think of her future, not just their feelings. And if they refuse, then maybe their love is smaller than they say. But his voice didn't sound as firm as usual. Up on the mountain, the story ended. Nye had fallen asleep halfway through. James set the book aside and gently lifted her, carrying her to the bed. Deep followed, steadying herself on the wall. He pulled the blanket to Nye's chin and watched her for a moment, the lamp throwing soft shadows across her face. James, Dieppe whispered. Today at the office, when that uncle asked if I was the owner, I was scared. Scared of a sign with your name on it? Scared I can't protect the things with my name, she said. The company, this house, Nye. She looked at the sleeping child. What if someone comes and says she doesn't belong here? He stepped beside her so they stood shoulder to shoulder, both looking at Nye. Then they'll have to get past us first, he said quietly. Not just me, us. His hand curled into a fist. Promise me something, she said. If I can, I will. No matter what happens later, Dieppe said. Don't decide anything about Nye without telling me. She's not my blood, but she's yours, he finished. Dieppe nodded. He just said, I promise. On the small table, his phone lit up with a new message from his father. Tomorrow we need to talk about Nye's schooling. It's time to plan her future. James stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it face down. He didn't mention it to Dee. Outside, the wind slid through the trees and around the thin walls of the house, as if warning that the quiet life they had just begun to build was already standing on a fragile edge.
Tập 5 mở đầu với câu chuyện chuyến du lịch mua bưởi, chuyến đi thu mua bưởi đầu tiên của công ty DJ do Diệp và James sáng lập. Trên sườn núi trơn trượt, Diệp sơ ý trượt chân, rơi xuống vực nông nhưng va đập mạnh bất tỉnh. James hoảng loạn lao xuống tìm từng búi cỏ, cuối cùng cũng bế được Diệp lên và đưa cô vào bệnh viện huyện để cấp cứu. Bác sĩ thông báo Diệp đã bị chấn thương não, gãy chân, cần theo dõi dài ngày và chi phí điều trị rất lớn. DJ thì vừa dốc hết vốn để ứng tiền cho bà con, tài khoản gần như trống rỗng. James không thể nhờ được bố của mình giúp, không muốn bán rẻ nỗ lực của Diệp đứng giữa phòng bệnh, anh buộc phải gọi cho bên đối tác chấp nhận đánh đổi lợi nhuận của DJ để cứu Diệp.